would like to kick off with a question for Alex?
Can I kick off? It's not really a question, it's more of an observation. You've probably noticed that I've got an English accent. What I feel, particularly in the wake of this J.K. Rowling thing, is that there's a lot of perception amongst people who have Scottish hearts, like I have, but an English accent, that there is some sort of prejudice. And I'm not sure that enough has come out to try and refute that. I like to think that I do my little bit now and again, you know, but I think maybe if nationally there was a more hearable English voice saying, yes, Scotland, that might do something.
You're volunteering yourself, Lindsay?
I'm never short of words.
There's a few of us around you.
Yeah, there are a few of us around, but there are equally quite a few people who express reservations. They have the same aspirations as the rest of us, but not the same confidence. And I think it's the confidence that needs to be won over, because the argument is won. It's a question of the confidence.
Okay. That's an excellent point, incidentally. I put looking at the voices. I mean, I've always been interested in argument because when I became the MP for Bath and Buchan, half my stint as executive were from England. And of course the SNP in its parliamentary group was a range of people who either were born in England or moved to Scotland. And of course the SNP's definition of Scottishness is totally civic. It's people who are here, who live and work here, or want to associate with Scotland. In fact, for homecoming, I've developed three definitions of Scottishness. One is people in Scotland. Secondly, there are people who have an affinity or ancestral link with Scotland. Or thirdly, everybody else who wants to go into Scotland. And if you look at our nationality definition in the white paper, I think it's page 232, I could be right or wrong about that. But Angus Robertson, born in London incidentally, Wimbledon, just said that on television about 5 minutes ago, when he was debating with Michael Forsyth. He said it was page 232. So I'm trusting Angus, and it's his fault. Then that definition of Scottishness is as broad as any definition I've ever seen in terms of nationality. So the point that I agree with, let's dispose of the J.K. Rowling point. J.K. Rowling is subjected to internet abuse. Everybody in their ante gets subjected to internet abuse. And for anyone to say a debate is defined by a few trolls on the internet, it's ludicrous. Otherwise, we wouldn't be talking about football or politics or plays or anything. Incidentally, the only piece of research on internet abuse, the guy at Strathclyde University, he had an article in the Sunday Herald. He's been a poor man, he's been looking at thousands of cases of internet abuse over the last year, and the man must be driving himself mad. And he's decided that internet abuse is 60% directed at the yes side and 40% at the no side. That doesn't make the 40% right, incidentally. It just means that you shouldn't allow a few nocturnal nutcases to define a debate. That's not what defines a debate. And the debate we're having is actually a very good debate. Where I actually agree with you, though, I think the voices and the articulation are important. Funny enough, I'm just drawing up something. I'm just about to appoint Tasmina Abin-Shea to a particular role in speaking about these issues. Tasmina, why? Because I think she's a rather good example. She's somebody who's brought up in London, she was born in London, brought up in London, obviously of Indian and English parents. So it's she kind of encapsulates the tartan of Scottishness in terms of background. But I actually agree with you, the articulation and the accent I think is important, and I'm going to make sure the Yes campaign has that range of articulations as we go into the campaign period. So that point I think is well worth doing, because you can say it as often, and believe me, right through my political life I've made this point. It's probably one of the issues which has defined my politics. But you can say something as often as you like, but sometimes it's helpful to have the accent saying it to articulate a point, because people believe not just what they hear, but people believe what they hear and see, and I think it's a very good point.
Thank you.
Now, let's go, more points, because you're on your lunch break. Except for me, of course, I'm on my 2-day. So that means while you are stuffing yourselves, I'll have to get a strawberry at the end. On you go.
Sorry, you do you want to?
Both go, one after the other.
Right, go. Okay. This is to do with the third sector and funding, and we, as part of Relationship Scotland and Relationship Scotland, Orkney Service represent, are in a strategic partnership with the Scottish Government, which we're delighted about, and we are commissioned to deliver services to support families affected by relationship difficulties and family dating. What do you think will happen after the 18th of September? Both sides. What's your views on that?
In terms of, will the country come together or things like that?
Well, yeah, well, if there's a yes vote, what do you think will happen to that funding and that partnership?
All right. Well, if there's a yes vote, we'll have 18 months of negotiation until Scotland becomes independent in the spring of 2016. There's a whole range of reasons I believe Scotland should be independent, but in economic public spending terms, a document we released 2 weeks ago actually sums things up. There's seats up here. I saw some of you guys a wee bit earlier on. You'll be on your lunch hour as well, eh? Yeah. Do they give you a whole hour?
They do, yeah, it's good.
Wait, we can change that. I mean, I wouldn't want to go to that school. But it shows a public spending trajectory of 3% growth, and which is interesting. The current government is looking at a 1% public spending trajectory. 1% is too little, and the period of austerity must come to an end. 3% is responsible. 3% is not a massive expansion of public spending; it's just a responsible. So it follows therefore that the public sector will be under less pressure than it has been. It won't mean it's under no pressure, because we're still going to have a lot of mess to clean up from the last few years. In terms of the first sector and the long sector, I hope the contract agreements that the Scottish Government have negotiated have actually been very good things. And I think the first sector has a big role to play. One point in particular, Martin Syme, the SCPO Chief Executive, one of my first campaigns was to campaign for him to be President of St Andrews University, SRC. He stood under the slogan "Sign for a Change." Well, we thought it was good at the time. And he didn't win. But I wasn't his campaign manager, I was just one of his foot soldiers. So I've known Martin a long time. But one of the best things we've done is the Young People Employment Programme with the third sector. And the success rate, that is success judged and people going on to a positive destination after that, is about 5 times the no-wage employment thing from the Department of Social Security. It's about 5 times successful, which is just one of the aspects of cooperation with the voluntary sector. So it'll be better, we'll do more of what we're doing, and we'll be able to do more of what we're doing because we'll move out of austerity. Not into a land of milk and honey incidentally, but move out of austerity.
My question is in relation to participation. The National Domestic Abuse Daily Plan for Children and Young People was incredible because it used groundbreaking participation by putting together the Voice Against Violence group that worked alongside the Scottish Government and COSLA to develop and implement policy. Now, Nicola Sturgeon has said herself that this was a one-of-a-kind, unique group that was the first of its kind in the world, and it proved that working together really worked, and that participation wasn't only possible but was vital in developing good policy. So my question is, would the lessons learned from such projects be used in the future to ensure that service users are heard in developing policy, and so that the policies are reflecting their needs? And how would that happen?
Well, the answer to that is yes, and yes for 2 reasons. One, because it sounds like a good idea. And secondly, because I could never disagree with Nicola. I'd have to watch myself. But it sounds really serious. It sounds like a grand idea, and it sounds like a bit of common sense. Nicola, since she's not here, and if you all promise not to tell her, it's the most amazing person. as Health Minister, the health is the most difficult brief any government, anytime, anywhere, for reasons which are perfectly understandable. I've never seen a Health Minister handle a health brief, you know, in my entire time in politics, like Nicola. You know, a challenging time. I mean, health is, and it is protected in terms of public spending, and like any other service. I mean, people here from other services know that every other service in the country has a real term decline in funding. Every other one has, except health. But even given that, because of the pressures on health, the real term pressures, so her behaviour in the health sector is extraordinary. I mean, I've never seen anybody handle a health brief like Nicola. Toughest job of all, and really, really well done. But that example you give in terms of policy formation sounds to me like a strikingly important example. Right, but I've talked too much. Right, well, let's rattle three questions at a time, and I'll make the answers shorter.
No, thank you, First Minister Stewart. Ferries are important, obviously, to Ireland. I'm actually thinking our internal fleet, that's not the ones that cross the Pennant, are ageing. They came on stream nearly all of them, I think, in the late 80s. So it's going to be a huge cost to renew them. I personally have a feeling that we should regard ferry routes as part of the road system. In other words, to come under some kind of road tax system, as when you pay for your road tax with the car. Would you agree or have thoughts on that, First Minister?
Okay, that's one. Ferries. Any others? Yeah.
It seems we've got some young folk here. Talking to my teenage daughter, it seems that many of her friends believe very firmly that tuition fees are most threatened by a yes vote. I wonder whether you could explain.
Okay, great. Young people, please.
Just looking at this leaflet, pictures of wind turbines and things. Currently, the renewable energy is very much subsidised by conventional energy bills nationwide, UK-wide. Just wondering where that money would come from under independent.
Okay, right. On ferries, where's Donna? Donna. I was having a word with your husband last night about this ferry subject. Believe it or not, as he was pressing the case for the renewal of the internal Orkney ferry fleet. I don't think the renewal of that, and you know, don't take this. I said to Steve what I said last night. Don't take this as a written down in blood and stone commitment. This is just an observation. I don't think the capital renewal of the ferry fleet is an issue that can't be overcome. Let's put it that way. Because capital spending never is. You know, if you're doing something worth doing for capital spending, there's always ways to get the capital. Like the school would just been, I've been at this morning. You know, so I think we can find a way to do that. The issue I think is more interesting is one of principle in terms of the internal fleet, how it should be run. You know, should it be run by the council, which would fit in with our subsidiarity argument, or is it such an impost, because ferries are expensive, that in addition to the support the government already provides incidentally in its running costs, should it be like part of the CalMac operation? And that's more difficult because there's a significant advantage in being part of a CalMac because they have a lot of opportunities of different designs of different ferries for different places, and if a ferry goes down, and the one I saw coming in last night, there's about those who can get a very strange angle. I'm not certain I'm thanking quite a lot. I represented a fishing constituency for 23 years. I consider myself an expert in all things naval and maritime, which I'm no, incidentally, but I do consider myself. It looked a little bit on the decrepit side, let's put it that way. And so obviously the advantages in being able to juggle about your fleet in terms of having the right boat to meet the specifications, and I think on these islands there must be many specifications of any kind of boats. However, we had a good conversation last night, and I think we can get something done on the replacement of the fleet. And I'm quite anxious to get CalMac doing more things, because CalMac's under a lot of pressure from European regulation just now. Some of its best routes getting picked off under competition law. Which, if you think about that happening successively, if it keeps getting corralled into its less profitable routes, then it gets more and more under pressure. So there might be something can be done. Maybe there's a way to make it part of the fleet that still have the benefit of local control it, and there must be something that can be done, and we'll set about doing it. But I think internal ferries is a big, big cost for an island community, because these are big capital sums to replace a ferry. And the last thing I'll say is, one of the great things, one of the reasons I think we do the capital, when we find the right ferries, i.e. whether they're hydrogen ferries using the electricity to produce the hydrogen, which would be, strike me as a good idea, or even LPG ferries, there must be an advantage to make them really green ferries, which of course opens up advantages in European funding. We managed to. I did a bus, right? I believe in all this stuff. I'm an absolute true believer. But I have to say, I launched a hydrogen bus in Aberdeen, right? And it's all funded by European funding, because it's one of the first hydrogen buses in Europe, right? But I'm working out, it's costing about £1 million a bus. I know that we're not paying for it, because it's a big grand, even I'm going, wait a minute, I mean, it's a great idea, of course. The hydrogen ferry would be equally a good idea. The idea is you use the surplus electricity from the wind at night, to then produce the electricity, which then produces the hydrogen, which then powers in a very clean way the bus or the ferry. But I'm hoping that does anyone here know when fuel cell technology was invented? By a Welshman. One of the few things in history it wasn't invented by a Scot. A Welshman invented hydrogen fuel cell technology. Ken, any idea when somebody invented hydrogen fuel cell technology? That wonderful chemistry thing you've got. No? Have a guess. Now, wouldn't it be asking if it was last year, would it? So when did a Welshman invent hydrogen fuel cell technology? Producing hydrogen gas from electricity, or for that matter, using hydrogen to produce electricity if you want. Any ideas? Have a guess. Have a quick stab.
70s or 80s?
Yeah, 1840. So it was invented in 1840-ish, and nobody's made it work economically.
There's two boys on Unst.
Except for the two boys on Unst.
Run a car on hydrogen fuel.
Well, it works.
It works fine.
It works fine, but that's not the issue. It's not the issue about working. It worked in my... It worked in my school way back in Livy and Right Sundays. No question about working. Just working economically is the question. Now, young people and tuition fees. Now, speaking as the First Minister who abolished tuition fees, and I have pledged that the rocks will melt with the sun before I'd ever see young people in Scotland pay for their education. If I was, I'm proud of the government. I think we've done some great things. I think we've made some mistakes as well, incidentally, but I think over the piece, on the whole, over the last 7 years, we've done no bad. But if I was to say one thing that I'd like the first SNP government in history to be remembered for, it's the abolition of fees for education. I think it's the one essentially great thing that Scotland invented. When I was alive, thinking about inventions, apart from fuel cell technology, and Scotland had invented everything, I thought, how come we invented, television, telephone, penicillin, all that stuff? How did we manage to invent all that? Are we naturally more inventive? Well, maybe we are, maybe we're not, but the reason we invented all these things is we invented the most important invention of all, which was free education. We invented free universal education. In the 16th century, we hit upon the idea that everybody should be educated. And because everybody was educated, at least to a certain standard, then your catchment area of inventors was hugely expanded. The reason we invented everything else is because we had more people available to invent, because we had people who were educated. So, free education comes with having the power to do it. And there's no way on earth I would ever, or any government I'm associated with, reimpose tuition fees for higher education. It's somewhat ironic. There's something that we did to undo the Tory and Labour parties imposing fees and Liberals on the students is then used as an argument against the SNP, but there's no way I'm perfectly satisfied we can secure free education in independent Scotland. And the last question was on, was it wind? Your point, sorry.
Funding of renewables.
Yeah. No, very interesting. Last week, the National Grid issued a notice to big electricity users in England, asking them if they were prepared to go into interruptible supply, because they couldn't guarantee their electricity by 2070 in peak periods. You've got the grid down south is now facing a huge crisis, that the supply of electricity cannot meet the peak demand, to the extent that the National Grid, disgracefully incidentally a private company, National Grid is a private company, that was outrageous, a outrageous are private electricity companies. They're just outrageous are running the grid, which is the one thing that should be in public hands. And that, that tells you this desperate shortage of electricity. 2017, 2018, probably again in the early 2020s. So we're not going to have any trouble whatsoever selling our electricity. Our plan is by 2020 we'll have 100% of our demand met from renewables and another similar quantity available for export, initially to the south of the border. We'll have no difficulty whatsoever selling. And the other reason we'll have no difficulty selling it is just a pure economic reason. Our wind, although wind is relatively more expensive than, for example, currently gas and coal, but it's a lot cheaper than wind elsewhere. Wind in Orkney for reasons that I can't possibly imagine. Also, onshore wind is a lot cheaper than offshore wind. So our wind is cheaper than wind available elsewhere. Our coal station in Loanna is cheaper than coal elsewhere. Our gas station at Peterhead is cheaper than gas elsewhere. Even our 2 nuclear stations, which, I've no difficulty with them continuing. I'm not going to have any more work, but are cheaper, much, devastatingly, much more cheaper than the budget we expect. £1 billion a year for the next 30 years on 2 new nuclear reactors. So we'll have no trouble with the competitive position or the demand for electricity produced from. The one thing we do need is connectivity. And we've got, thank goodness, connectivity in the mainland, and we've got connectivity going down the west coast with the new bootstrap line, enough to take about 9-10 gigawatts to England and to Wales. But we need connectivity from the Scottish Islands, from the Western Isles and from here, so that electricity gets to the mainland. Incidentally, thankfully, given we did Beauly Denny, once it gets to the mainland we'll be able to get it south. And all these folk who have protested about Beauly Denny, and I know that people have the right to protest, they never quite answered the question. If we don't have the transmission network, then how do you transport the electricity? We're reasonable. But so we're in a good position, and the last link in terms of the export for electricity is the transmission from the islands. And then I hope within the foreseeable future what's called a super grid to transmit electricity from west to east across the North Sea, combined hopefully with the Norwegian hydro to offer a big offering, because the shortage in electricity, clean electricity, it's not just in England, it's in many of the continental European countries. And if I had to absolutely depend on gas supplies from Russia at the present moment, I wouldn't think that was the greatest idea in the world, as many people are finding out. So we'll be all right.
Thank you.
Right, Marky?
Could I follow that particular question about the environment with a general one about the environment? I'm a member of the Scottish Green Party and therefore inclined to vote yes. And I also run a wildlife tourism business here in Orkney, have done for 11 years. And I'd just be interested in your views about how the environment and sustainability fits in to the new Scottish Government. And I think strategically there are some great things in that white paper, especially the commitment to renewables, which is excellent, and world leading, I would say. I have to say I'm slightly more concerned about the commitment to site protection, and especially marine site protection. Sites like the certain Aberdeenshire golf course, which we probably shouldn't mention. And even here in Scapa Flow, which is under real threat from ballast water, crude ballast water. I'd like to be assured that the government really will be on the case and make sure that these things are protected.
Okay. Please.
This is not necessarily relating to Orkney, but in a roundabout way it is, because it encapsulates stuff about disability rights, access, land management, and creating a fair and equal society. But I'm just wondering what the Scottish Government, or what role they're going to have in the Riding for the Disabled Association facility in Bannockburn. So I don't know about you, but I found it particularly galling that Melanie Reid had a big splash about it in the Times. When I think there's an onus on the Scottish Government to take an active role in that. Okay. And I was wondering what the Scottish Government had to do with that.
Right. Okay. Last question. Last of this for you.
I'd like to ask about what the Scottish Government would do about access and entitlement to legal aid. I represent an advocacy service, and it's becoming a huge problem for us as a charity, that many of our clients can no longer pursue things because they don't have access to any legal aid. and I can't get the lawyers to give me a straight answer.
Okay. Right. Well, I'm glad about the renewables. The Trump thing, you know, it went to a public local inquiry. I'm not certain, I mean, my views on Mr. Trump, his views would be, my views on him are quite well known, and his views on me are even better known, perhaps. Talking about internet abuse and stuff, have a good look at and you know, I won't go into what I actually think about, but there we are. He has an extraordinary ability, you know, to. I always used to think about Tony Blair. That Blair was a kind of method actor. You know, Blair kind of convinced himself, and then he set about convincing everybody else. It didn't matter what nonsense it was, like the one in Iraq. He convinced himself, then he convinced them all. Trump's like that, except his stuff is even more incredible. He convinces himself of a reality that nobody else is engaged in. But I can't say I believed that the argument about the SSSI, you know, Barbarians in my constituency. I know, you know, these students. I know how they were used and who used them. And I don't think of all the arguments that can be deployed against the Trump golf course development, that was the best one. I think many people would argue that the nature of these dunes is actually probably, if not enhanced, then certainly not damaged or diminished by the reality of the golf course. Now, I'm a very keen golfer, I'm probably a wee bit prejudiced and all the rest of it, but if every SSI in Scotland development challenging it was a golf course, it would not be the worst thing I've ever seen in terms of the protection of the environment, you know what I mean? So it was balanced in terms of the public local inquiry, and that's what decided. Other issues, you know, I'm quite certain that there are many. I mean, there was, for example, one of the great wind developments in the Hebrides was turned down on the environmental directive. I think I met the environmental commissioner recently, and we have to find a way of not saying no development, but saying there must be a way of encouraging compatible development with protected areas. Because no development has in itself penalties. And that, for example, the peat habitat, which was what was being protected in the Western Isles, the non-development of that area has certain difficulties with. So I'm quite happy to work with it, and you know, I'm delighted with our Green colleagues in the Yes campaign, and there's a great deal of friendship and co-working, and it's working in my opinion well. But obviously people are different parties, they have a different emphasis, and that's as it should be, because the whole point about this is to allow people to make a choice in an independent Scotland about the direction of the government. And I don't think it is incidentally beyond the bounds of possibility. People talk about coalitions. I don't think at some stage that an SNP Green coalition would be the longest bet I would make in politics. Or perhaps a Green SNP coalition. Who knows? Times change, politics change. The disability thing, I'm going to look into this and see what I can. I didn't see Melanie Reid's article. Melanie Reid, for those of you who don't know, is a journalist who suffered a serious accident and disability, a riding accident. I shall look at the issue and see what can be done to help.
My understanding of it is it's on a particular estate owned by I'd probably say, I'm not saying what I think folk are referring to as, but it's a riding for the sales association, which is primed as one of the kind of leading services in central Scotland. The reason I'm interested is my friend's son attends it.
Yeah.
And what's happened is the landowners dug up the road and are unable to, folk with disabilities or additional support needs are unable to get access to riding for the sales centre. And they're now in a situation where they're going to have to close, or potentially have to close, because they're unable to get land or access.
And I'll look at the specific issue. More generally, of course, can I commend the Land Reform Commission paper to everyone. I think there's some great stuff in there, absolutely brilliant stuff. Doesn't necessarily mean that every single proposal will be able to enact, never does, but I mean, there's some great stuff in there. You know, I set this target of 1 million acres under community land ownership by 2020, and I think we'll get there. And we've replenished the land fund, but there's more to it than that. It's about usage of land we've got and rights. But I would commend that to you. But on the particular issue of the riding school, disability riding school, I shall look into it personally and see if there's something I can do to help. And thirdly, on legal aid budget's been pretty constrained in time. I understand that. It's something I'd love for us to be able to do more of and better. We must obviously find a way to get people access to the rights legally. I have some impatience with some lawyers. I mean, there's a firm of lawyers who go nameless who constantly demand public inquiries. And the reason they constantly demand public inquiries is they make lots of money out of public inquiries. And public inquiries go on for 7 years. They're at the point of public inquiry going on for 7 years, and then by the time you get to the end, then the lessons that you wanted to learn, have been going on for a long time. So I think maybe there has to be a better way to conduct public inquiries so that people aren't allowed to spin them out and spin them out and spin them out. But nonetheless, I'm conscious of the pressure on the legal aid budget. I really am. I would say that pressure on public spending, this last 5 years, I think John Swinney, my estimation is a miracle worker, in terms of what he's managed to protect and preserve under that sort of unprecedented public spending pressure.
I mean, I raise it simply because the problem is that the pressure then comes back on charities like ourselves, like Advocacy Orkney, who are actually a charity providing a statutory function under the Mental Health Act, but relying on core funders. So I'll definitely vote for you if I can get my money straight from the Scottish Government.
That was not a blackmail.
That's not blackmail, it's a positive incentive. But I know what you mean, it's intermediary, things often get lost, and it's a wee bit of, there's always a tension, people say, oh, you mustn't centralise this and centralise that. Often you find that people rather like some aspects of, and I feel this tension myself, because you can see things that are better run locally, much better run locally, with local knowledge and all the rest of it. But there are certain things, there's no question that the direct central support is better protected and organised, and it sometimes happens at local level. I will look at the advocacy thing.
Thank you very much.
Not a firm commitment, promise, etc., but nonetheless, I shall have a wee look. I hope you're taking a note of the things I've promised to have a look at, because I usually have a squad of civil servants who note everyone down and make sure I don't forget. Folks, I'm conscious about the lunch hour. Can I just say a couple of things in conclusion? I think we're winning this campaign. I know that what press say we're not, and all the rest of it, and I know what the polls say, and the polls are actually very good, as you probably realise, in terms of the yes vote rising, but that's not the reason I think we're winning. I think that we're winning because of meetings rather like this. I'm doing lots and lots of them. I rolled up to a meeting in Dundee 2 weeks ago for the 5 million questions project at Dundee University, and it's run by a guy called Michael Marr, who's a Labour candidate, brother of Jenny Marr, and my Tory biographer, David Torrance, who is a Tory. So, so it wasn't kind of designed to be helpful to the yes campaign. Let's put that. I'm not saying it's anything other than a straight up project, but let's put it this way: they wouldn't be doing us any great favours. So I turned up, and it was folk from round Dundee. It wasn't students. It was everybody got tickets. I thought that's quite good. 400 folk, in the hall for a question and answer. So I did the question and answer. It's all in line. It went okay. It went good actually. I managed to poke some fun at David, which I really enjoyed. Not over much, but nonetheless I did. And then I was staying to talk to folk afterwards. And then I found out as I went outside, because some people had waited to see me, there had been 2 overspill halls with 200 people in them, and a third overspill hall of another 50 people. So it had actually been 850 people. I turned up for a question. I've never experienced politics of this sort of level of interest. And people say, well, why do public meetings matter? Well, why it matters is because what happens at these sort of meetings, that people go along, and they come along in these sort of meetings, like the one in Dundee, who a substantial number of them are not politically committed, certainly not party politically committed, but just want to ask a few questions about this, that and the next thing. Most of them, I would say everyone, whatever their views, comes out with a better impression of the yes I argument that they went in with. But the real thing is, everybody tweets. So like, of that 800 folk, at least 400, maybe 300 would be tweeting to hundreds of folk. So there's a percussion effect, everything is getting multiplied. And the reason that this is quite different. This is taking public meetings of that level of interest in politics to a new level. It's having a percussion effect, an amplifying effect. It's a kind of interaction between public meetings or question and answers and social media. And I don't think the other side can match this. I mean, they can say, oh, the debate is dreadful and depressing and horrible and all the rest of it, but it's not dreadful and depressing and horrible. On the contrary, it's actually enlivening and exciting and interesting. The debate in the written press is rubbish, but then the written press is rubbish. Well, the sole exception of the Sunday Herald, of course, which is first class. But they're dying out. It's all gone. When this lot of through their university, which they won't have to pay fees for. Most of these papers will be gone. And if they are still there, the written edition of the paper edition will just be a small thing of their online presentation. It's all gone. So I don't think they matter that much. Television matters, radio matters. We're now into a period of where the campaign is much better regulated. So that's in a more regulated thing now, and that's going to help us. So the meetings they can't match, the TV's now regulated. I don't think the written press matters, and that's why I think we're going to win. And at the end of the day, the thing I've learned in politics, and it took me a while to learn it, was that the only circumstances where a negative campaign wins is if it's up against another negative campaign. A negative campaign will never beat a positive campaign. If it's two negative campaigns, then the most negative campaign wins. The worst campaign wins. But if it comes up against a positive campaign, the positive will always beat the negative. Because most people, not everyone, but most people want to vote for something, not against something. And as long as we keep on that positive dimension, not promising a land of milk and honey the day after independence, but saying if we work together and we try to do certain things together as a society over a period of years, then we can improve things substantially, not just economically, but in terms of the fairness by which society operates. And if we stay onto that message and talk about the enormous, gobsmacking natural resources of this country and how we can match and marry the resources to the people, so that the resources work for the people, not the people just for the resources. If we stay on that message, then we win. So I think we'll win. And I'm challenging every single one to do to make sure that Orkney is part of that win, because the Orkney result will be declared as Orkney, so there'll be no hiding place. So that's your job and that's our job, and yeah, I think we'll win. And thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you.